Hello! In this presentation, we explain how the product rule for differentiation can be obtained through an example. The product rule says that if f and g are differentiable functions, that is, their derivatives exist, then the derivative of their product, f times g, is equal to the derivative of f times g plus f times the derivative of g. In other words, the derivative of f of x times g of x is f prime of x times g of x plus f of x times g prime of x. In fact, the derivative of a product is not the product of the derivatives of f and g, as shown in the following example. Take f of x equals to x and g of x equals to x plus 1. Both functions are linear and their derivative is the slope of the line representing each function. For both f and g, the slope is 1, and so is their derivative. Hence, f prime of x is 1 and g prime of x is 1. Now the product rule says that the derivative of f times g, which is x times x plus 1, is equal to f prime of x, which is 1, times g of x, which is x plus 1, plus f of x, which is x, times g prime of x, which is 1. Overall, we get 1 times x plus 1 plus x times 1. That's equal to 2x plus 1. And that is the derivative of the product. Now, if we multiply the derivatives of f and g, we simply get 1 times 1, which is 1. Clearly, 1 is not the same as 2x plus 1, and therefore the derivative of a product is not the same as taking the product of the derivatives of each function. To understand how we could come up on our own with the product rule, I suggest that we go through a practical example taken from Matt Balpkin's Active Calculus section 2.3. So consider an investor that invests in a stock by buying shares of that stock. The total value of a stock held on a given day is the product of the number of shares times the price per share. Call each of these functions respectively v of t, n of t, and s of t. So n of t is the number of shares owned on day t, s of t is the value of one share, and v of t is the total value of the shares. So v of t is also the total value of the stock. According to the product rule, since v of t is the product of n of t times s of t, the derivative of v, say on the 100th day, is given by n prime of 100 times s of 100 plus n of 100 times s prime of 100. What I want to look at is if there's a way to understand this sum in the context of the problem and get an intuitive understanding of where the product rule comes from. So say on the 100th day, the investor owns 520 shares. So that is n of 100 is 520. So remember that the function n counts how many shares there are on a given day. The stock's current value is $27.50 per share. So that is s of 100 is 27.50. The investor purchases 12 shares. That is, the number of shares grows by 12, and n prime of 100 is 12, and the price of the stock rises by 75 cents per share. That is, s prime of 100 is 0.75. The increase in total value on the 100th day, given dollars per day, is v prime of 100. This increase comes from two sources: the growing number of shares and the rising value of the shares. So now let's focus on the growing number of shares. Suppose that the price of a share stays at $27.50. Even though in the original problem it's changing, we assume for now that it's not. So the increase in total value would only come in that case from the growing number of shares. Now, the number of shares is growing by 12 per day since 12 more shares have been purchased, and each share is worth $27.50. So $27 per share times 12 more shares per day gives us an increase of $330 per day. That's the same as multiplying s of 100 times n prime of 100, and that would be the value of v prime of 100. Now, let's focus on the rising value of the shares. Suppose that the number of shares remains constant at 520 shares. Since the price of a share is growing by 75 cents per share per day, So it would increase to $28.25. Then 520 shares times $0.75 per share per day gives an increase in the total value of $390 per day. That's the same as multiplying n of 100 times s prime of 100, and that would be the value of v prime of 100. When both the number of shares and their price are rising in our case, then the increase in total value v prime of 100 is obtained by adding up both sources of increase. This way we get that v prime of 100 is equal to n prime of 100 times s of 100 plus n of 100 times s prime of 100. Finally, there's nothing special about doing these computations on the 100th day, and the result holds for any day. Therefore, in general, v prime of t, which is the derivative of the product of n of t times s of t, is equal to n prime of t times s of t plus n of t times s prime of t. And if we replace t by x, n by f, and s by g, we obtain the product rule as stated on the first slide. That is, the derivative of f of x times g of x is f prime x, g of x, plus f of x times g prime of x. Thanks for listening.